Did you know using your browser in incognito mode doesn't actually protect your privacy? Take back your privacy with IPVanish VPN. Just one tap and all your data, passwords, communications, browsing history, and more will be instantly protected. IPVanish makes you virtually invisible online. Use IPVanish on all your devices, anytime you go online at home and especially on public Wi-Fi. Get IPVanish now for 70% off a yearly plan with this exclusive offer at ipvanish.com/audio.
Hold your ears, folks. It's showtime.
People pay good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
Sister, sister, oh so fair, why is there blood all over your hair?
Whatever happened to baby Jane? To seek the answer to that question, we will follow a man plotting a murder. Highly specialized work. But Robert Aldrich has considerable experience in such matters. He has a dozen successful pictures to his credit. His stars are Bette Davis and Joan Crawford. The scene: an Italianate villa in a once fashionable section of Los Angeles. Its halls, once crowded with the bright, the beautiful, and the celebrated, now echo only to hectic whispers, the insistent call of a buzzer better left unanswered. A telephone that has become an object of fear. A supper tray that will not be touched. A window barred against the world. A hammer. A mute scrawl crying for help. From these elements, director Aldrich has fashioned a motion picture with a curious title: Whatever Happened to Baby Jane? Bette Davis is Jane Hudson. Joan Crawford is Blanche Hudson. But we must warn you, if you're long-standing fans of Miss Davis and Miss Crawford, this motion picture is quite unlike anything they have ever done. It is a bold essay in the art of the macabre, a venture to the ultimate reaches of terror. A motion picture definitely not for the squeamish. And we beg you, as the tension builds to the screaming point, as shock after shock assaults your senses, try to remember that this is only a motion picture. Try and remember.
Get away from me!
No, we can't show you anymore. Only when you see whatever happened to baby Jane will you know. And the answer is total suspense.
Welcome to the projection booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Joining me once again is Mr. Otto Bruno.
Mike, happy as always to be with you.
Also joining us is Mr. Tim Madigan.
Heavy.
But by the way, Mike, I don't want to be a stickler or anything, but it's Dr. Tim Madigan.
Oh,
please.
okay. Also joining us is Dr. Tim Madigan.
He's my PCP.
Thank you.
What do you got there?
This is a gallon of PCP.
Wow, a gallon.
Yes. Yeah.
That's illegal, right?
Yeah, it's a felony.
It's a felony.
Yes.
Wow. And here you are with it anyway. That is, wow. I didn't even know it came in liquid form.
Science.
We are kicking off a month discussing films starring might be a little stretch, featuring the oversized thespian himself, Victor Buono. We start things off with Robert Aldrich's Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, the ground zero of the subgenre called Hagsploitation or Psycho Biddy. The film stars Joan Crawford and Bette Davis as Blanche and baby Jane Hudson. We will be spoiling this film as well as the FX show Feud as we go along, so if you don't want anything ruined, please turn off the podcast and come back after you've seen the movie and or the show, and we will still be here. So Otto, when was the first time you saw Baby Jane and what did you think?
I never saw this movie when I was young because I was never really interested in horror films or things like that. I was more interested in watching old Jewish comedians. I think I saw this film for the first time about 10 years ago, just because I felt I needed to fill in that hole in my movie viewing checklist. And I watched, in fact, I think I watched one evening after another. I watched this and then the follow-up, Sweet Charlotte. I think I liked Sweet Charlotte better, but Dr. Tim and I just watched Baby Jane again this week. And I have to say, I think I enjoyed it more this time around as an exercise in camp more than I did as a serious picture. And I know some people would probably take offense to that. It certainly brings up some fascinating ideas. Most interesting for me is probably how Hollywood historically, maybe not so much right now in this moment, but historically tossed away women who were over 40 years old. So in that sense, that's probably the most interesting, serious theme of this film to me. But it's fun. Who's going to argue? It's fun to see Bette Davis torturing Joan Crawford. It's just a good time.
And Tim, how about yourself?
I know I saw it many times on television when I was a kid, primarily because, unlike Otto, I was a monster kid. I loved watching old monster movies, and rightly or wrongly, it was often lumped in with them. In fact, it wasn't until many years later that I started to watch Joan Crawford and Bette Davis movies that were not their Hagsploitation or horror films. And I just saw it again. Otto and I watched it a couple of days ago, but I saw it about 5 years ago at an event called the Monster Bash, which occurs in Mars, Pennsylvania, twice a year. People who love old monster movies, and it seemed very appropriate. And that was the one and only time I ever saw it on the big screen, which is, of course, how most of these movies were meant to be seen, but many of them we have never seen that way.
That must have been quite a treat, because this movie is beautiful to look at. The cinematography is fantastic.
It is, and also the music is great by Frank DeVole, who I believe also did the music for Sweet Charlotte, and many other great films, of course. And I remember him as Happy Kine on Fernwood Tonight.
That's all I can think of when I think of Frank DeVole.
One of the great deadpan performances of all time.
Yeah, I like the music, how it plays with the Letter to Daddy theme, and then there's the Baby Jane theme itself, which I guess, because I know for sure when we talk about Hush Sweet Charlotte in 2 weeks, there was a theme written for it, and who was it, Patty Page?
Yeah,
did that? Yeah,
that was a hit.
And then this one, I have never heard it sung by anybody other than Bette Davis, though it's not in the movie. It's just outside of the movie.
She sang it. Where did she sing it? On Ed Sullivan? Is that where she sang it?
Andy Williams show. We watched the clip from
that's the one, Andy Williams show.
She put out a 45 of it, too.
We watched the clip that the Cookie Bear would come out and dance with her, but no such luck.
It took me a long time to see this one. I was more aware of its reputation than I was of the film itself. I haven't seen that many films by Bette Davis or Joan Crawford. When I was in school, it was probably the first time that I saw movies by either of them. I was in a women in film class, and I got to see Now Voyager, and then a few weeks later, Mildred Pierce. So that was a very interesting experience, and especially to see both of those films. I think if you throw Stella Dallas in there, you've got this real triumvirate of self-possessed women with their daughters. I like how Bette Davis is the daughter in Now Voyager, but just, yeah. And then who is it? Paul Henreid in that one with her. Such a great movie. And yeah, I really only ever knew of this from all of the pop culture. And when I finally watched it, the pop culture picks up on 2 or 3 little things from this movie. It really doesn't tell you what the whole story is. And it really just basically has a woman in crazy makeup torturing a woman in a wheelchair. And that's all I knew about this film. I didn't know the whole backstory about Joan and Bette and why this was such a big deal that they're being cast together in this film for the first time. But I loved it. Really enjoyed it. I liked it the first time, but now I think I love this movie. Had a really nice time revisiting this and then learning all the things that went on behind the scenes and just seeing another Robert Aldrich film because I really like him and he's such a workmanlike director, but he brings some panache to things.
Yeah, one of my favorite films is The Flight of the Phoenix, which is so radically different from this film. But as you say, he is an excellent director, just to keeping your attention as you watch the various characters in motion.
Of course, the first Robert Aldrich film I ever saw was probably Four for Texas.
Oh, funny.
With Frank and Dean and Victor Buono. Because the Rat Pack, certainly Frank and Dean, seemed to like Victor Buono because he was in Four for Texas, and then just a short while after that, he was in Robin and the Seven Hoods with them as well. So that's probably the first Aldrich that I ever saw. But see, my experience was totally different from you guys because my film fanaticism really began with the old Warner Brother catalog of the 30s and 40s because our local PBS station used to show those movies on Friday night at around 10:30, and then they would replay the same film on Sunday afternoon. So the first time I ever saw Bette Davis, I know exactly, which I usually can't pinpoint, but I know exactly the first time I saw her was in Petrified Forest opposite Bogart and Leslie Howard from 1936. So I actually did see the young Bette Davis long before I saw anything like Whatever Happened to Baby Jane or Sweet Charlotte or things like that. So I guess maybe if you see those things first, seeing her in this maybe frightens you even more. Because while she was not the typical Hollywood glamour star, she wasn't attractive when you see some of her roles in the 30s. She is attractive. And I, again, because all the music I follow was also from the 30s, 40s, or 50s, but somebody in the 70s or 80s, didn't they make a song, Bette Davis Eyes or something?
Kim Carnes.
Kim Carnes, there you go.
I found it interesting that they actually use clips from some of their old films in this film and that they're using I can't remember which movie it is with Bette Davis, but they're using that as an example of what a poor actress she is. And Bert Freed is just out there in the little viewing room, just like, oh, she's terrible. And I'm like, I don't see anything wrong with this performance. She's exactly a very capable actress.
And apparently she gave her permission to show those clips, rather.
We're always our own harshest critics.
I thought I read somewhere where they asked her, are there any bad films that we could show from when you were really young? And from the first 5 years, they're all bad or something like that, which is probably not the type of remark that you would have gotten from Joan Crawford.
True.
But I don't think, it's like Davis didn't think much of those early Warner Brother films. She started with them, in 31 or something, 31, 32. But I don't think she really hit her stride there till 35, 6, certainly, because I know 36 was Petrified Forest. It might also 36 or 37, 38 was when Jezebel came out as well. And Jezebel, I think, is what really propelled her.
I remember watching that in a different film class. Our professor showed us that one too. It took me years and years to see All About Eve. And when I finally saw it, I was like, I don't see what the big deal is about, but I need to revisit that one.
Yeah, I love All About Eve. I love that film. I just love what Mankiewicz did in that very short time period, late 40s, early 50s. And All About Eve is in the middle of all that.
I still have a lot of memories of seeing Bette Davis on talk shows like Johnny Carson and Merv Griffin, and she would often rehash the story of her feud with Joan Crawford, who by that time was long dead. And even as a kid, I had the feeling she wasn't doing herself any favors, as coming across a crabby, bitter woman talking about feuds with people who were long gone. And I'm sure, sadly, that was one of the reasons the talk show host liked her as a guest, because she would badmouth people.
The last person I want to ask you about is the lady with whom, in many minds, you are forever linked. That's Joan Crawford.
I know, isn't it incredible we're forever linked? We made one film. It's funny that remained.
I'm sorry.
Well, it was a good movie. It was a good movie. As far as making the film with her, she was on time. She knew her lines. She basically was a pro. But we're very different kind of women, very different kind of actresses. Yes.
But afterwards, how would you characterize your relationship?
Came when she saw to it I didn't get the Oscar for Baby Jane. She went to all the New York nominees and said, if you can't get out there, I'll accept your award. And please do not vote for her. She was so jealous. She was a fool, my dear. We had a great percentage. If I had won that Oscar, we'd have made $1 million more on the film. That's what always happens. So she wasn't very smart about what she did.
You hurt by the memory of that?
I was furious, because that would have made me the first person with 3. And as I always have to be first as an Aries. Yes, and I should have had it all. Very immodest of me. I should have had it for that year, no question.
The exception is Dick Cavett. You can see on YouTube, he does, as he did with so many great stars, a long interview with her, and he's very good at keeping her off that track, or maybe just a little bit of it to spice things up. But quite often you just see her come on, and especially as someone who hadn't seen her other movies, I just wondered what's going on here, especially her post-stroke period where she just seemed bad physical shape as well as bad-tempered.
Yeah, when it comes to Joan Crawford, other than Mildred Pierce, I don't think I've seen that many early Crawford roles. And for me, growing up when I did, it was the Mommy Dearest era. So it was just, that's all you ever heard about Joan Crawford, or you would see Carol Burnett portraying Joan Crawford with some of the stories that were coming out. So yeah, that was all I knew about her for the longest time. It took until I started to see things, ironically, until I saw Straitjacket, where I was like, oh, she's really good. Like, I liked her a lot in Mildred Pierce, but it was such a foreign film for me just because it was so old and it had a different mentality to it. And I was like, yeah, okay, this is a good film. Of course, some people consider it a great film, but when I saw Straitjacket, I said, oh, okay, now I kind of see what all the hype is about. And that was her when she was, quote unquote, past her prime. Because I do like this idea of them talking about what happens to actresses after their prime. But for me, too, this movie talks a lot about the way in which we ingest movies, and also entertainment. Just the whole idea of starting off with the whole vaudeville thing with Baby Jane, and then the medium kind of changes. By the time she gets into movies, she's made more for the vaudeville stage than for the movie set. And then her sister is the one that kind of takes over that. She becomes the big star. And then by the time they're all washed up, what's happening? They're watching, or people are watching them on television. And that's the only way that people are getting exposed to some of these older films, is through TV, through this tiny little screen. We get that huge stage at the beginning. We get the big screen that Bert Fried is watching, and then everything's reduced to that tiny little TV with all the commercials for dog food and stuff in the middle of it.
So that was the one aspect I was spared by watching the old movies on PBS, because they would run them commercial free. So that was great for me. And I always was, from a very young age, was more aware of Bette Davis than I was of Joan Crawford, because, as I say, I guess I was just lucky. But at the moment in time I started watching these movies on Friday nights, they must have gotten a deal on the Warner Brothers library or something, because all of these films, I didn't realize it then, but now I've looked back on it. I've even looked up the old newspapers clippings of them. All of them were Warner Brothers pictures. And of course, Crawford in the 30s and 40s, early 40s at least, was an MGM star. And even as I got older and started watching all different classic movies, MGM was certainly not my favorite studio to watch. If you haven't seen much Joan Crawford, the one movie that was another one that I needed to fill out my scorecard, because I had never seen it and I watched it about a year or so ago, is The Women, directed by George Cukor. And the whole film is just women. There are no men whatsoever in the movie. It's 1939. They are discussed and mentioned, but you never see, and it has Joan Crawford, Rosalind Russell, Norma Shearer, who at the time was on her last legs as the queen of MGM, and a lot of great female stars. And Crawford and Shearer, and probably Russell, are the three main components of that. And Crawford is great in that. But yeah, I'm like you. I had just not seen, of course, I've seen Mildred Pierce.
Grand Hotel also, that's a classic that we've all seen. And she's excellent in that. I was just thinking about the women, the scenes with Norma Shearer and Joan Crawford somewhat mirror Baby Jane, in the sense that Norma Shearer is this wonderful, lovely person who's being so mistreated by Joan Crawford. And then later in her career, Crawford, around the Mildred Pierce era, wanted to always be the nice person who's often put upon and the audience is sympathetic towards. But in both cases, it's the villainess who gets the bulk of the attention, and in Bette Davis's case, the Academy Award nomination. So playing the nice person often doesn't do you good if you're interested in awards.
Nice guys finish last.
The amount of Joan Crawford is very apropos when you read the book. And I know, Tim, you just finished reading the book. I think it's a great adaptation. I think that they did a really good job with that. And not only do they do a good job as far as condensing this rather sprawling story into a very tight package, but also doing the really smart thing of keeping Joan and Bette off screen for a long time. Like, we start with them as little kids. You get to see what their relationship is like there. We go into the 30s and we see the screening room and Bert Freed's reaction there. And then we move into, we just see them on screens. We see into the screening room. And then when the neighbor comes home and walks in and her daughter's watching television, we see a Joan Crawford movie on television. I want to say, I counted yesterday, it takes at least, 18 minutes before we finally see Joan Crawford in the flesh. And we get to see that stark difference between her in those early films. And they did a great job with the makeup on her, because there are some shots in the movie, and I know we'll talk about Feud later. There's some shots in the movie where she looks really young and looks great. And I'm saying, like, in the 1962 film, she looks fantastic. But then when you see her for the first time, she's got all these bags under her eyes and just does not look very good at all. And of course, towards the end, she looks terrible. But I thought that was nice that we have a little bit of a shock when we see her. But then when we see Bette Davis, that's a real shock.
You wonder if Aldrich was influenced at all by the horror movies like Frankenstein and Dracula, which have the same formula. You don't show the monster. You hear about the monster and you have various villagers telling you about the monster, but you don't actually experience the monster for some time, or like Jaws. In fact, I was just talking to a friend of mine. It's the 50th anniversary, of course, of Jaws. And we both loved it as we saw it when it originally came out. And he said his son watched it and said, it's so slow. It's not 45 minutes until, after the initial attack, you get another attack. So I said, tell him to watch Jaws 2, 3, 4, and 5. You get attacks every minute or so. But
oh, yeah.
But then you lose the suspense. And then I think that's one of the reasons Baby Jane still holds up, because even though we now know what we're going to experience, some people, of course, will be seeing it for the first time with no knowledge of the actresses, but it has entered popular culture, particularly Bette Davis in that garish outfit and the white pancake makeup.
The white pancake makeup definitely creeped me out.
It's the stuff of nightmares.
It's those big curls, big nasty curls that she has in the back, and the darkness around her eyes and her lips. She looks almost like a No character, like a Kabuki character at times. She's so white with the black markings across her.
Well, here's a stretch for you guys. One of the things I think of when you see this movie is the Waltons.
Really?
Oh.
And the reason is the first time I ever saw The Homecoming on TV, I was, 7, I guess, when it came out. And if you remember, there's a scene in The Homecoming where Elizabeth gets this gift, this doll they were raffling off or whatever it is. And she opens it up, and it was a porcelain doll, so that part of her face and head were smashed in, basically. And she throws it down because she's scared of it. And it scared me as a kid. So when I'm watching Baby Jane and you see those big porcelain dolls that are supposed to be Baby Jane, that's like the only thing I think of. And then the makeup on Bette Davis, it's like, for me, porcelain, certain types of porcelain dolls and clowns, which are the type of makeup that Bette Davis is wearing, are inherently creepy in and of themselves. So you put those two things together in this movie, and that kind of works to creep me out as well. Those two elements of it.
Well, we're jumping ahead about Feud, but in that show, Bette Davis comes up with the formula, as it were, to put the white pancake makeup on. And I don't know if that is actually the case or not, but in the novel, that's not the case. It's not really described what she looks like. So that definitely, whether it was her idea or someone else's, that really does add to the horror.
I feel like I read it was her idea, like it really was her idea.
Yeah, they don't really have that many descriptions. Farrell will talk more about Jane than he will about Blanche. It isn't until towards the end of the book where he talks about Blanche with her gray hair. And I was like, oh, I never really pictured her having gray hair. When he talks about Jane, he talks mostly about how alcohol has ravaged her body, how puffy she is, how bloated she is, that she's just overweight and looks ridiculous in some of these clothes that she wears. She just seems like what Bette Davis is bringing to this. The dowdiness can only take you so far. The makeup really pushes us into that horror territory.
Still dressing up like Baby Jane, because that's another aspect of horror, as child stars who don't make it, as opposed to like the Jodie Foster types who have a great career above and beyond being children actors. We know so many of the depressing and sometimes horrifying stories about those who don't, and also taps into that in a very visceral way.
She's basically clinging to the only success she had. I hate to put it this way, but I think we probably have all known people who you meet them as adults. They could be in their 50s or 60s, and they still talk about high school and their glory days of high school.
Boring stories of glory days.
But it's sad because the impression it leaves is that was the best they ever did. That was the best times of their life. And it's sad and pathetic. And that, of course, is what Jane is. Give Bette Davis credit. She's playing this monster, but she's playing a monster who you also feel sympathy for.
Look like Boris Karloff in Frankenstein.
What's the little girl in the bad seat all grown up? Because Jane is not a pleasant person when you get to see how she is demanding ice cream. And I love that it's ice cream at the beginning and it's ice cream at the end. This whole like, no, I want ice cream. And the things in the book where it's all the people who are, and I think it's in the movie too, where they're whispering just like, oh, I didn't know that she was like that. Oh, what a terrible child she is. And it was before social media, so she just kept on being what she was. But then her sister starts to eclipse her, and there's a whole thing of in the book, and it might come in here, where it's like in part of Blanche's contract is that Jane has to have a role in every movie that Blanche is in. And I think that's a nice thing, but at the same time, I'm like, is she just lording it over Jane now that she's the big star and Jane is just the hanger-on? Because it really flipped the tables. And to flip the tables when you're like 12 years old, that's got to be really damaging to your psyche.
Well, it could be reminiscent of John Ford, how his brother Francis was the star in silent films, and then Francis hired John Ford for some of his silent pictures and really put his younger brother, through the ringer. And then, of course, for years after that, when John Ford became the number one director in Hollywood, Francis would almost always have a role, but it would always be a minor role. Usually it was nothing to really sink your teeth, nothing that was going to get him any kind of award nominations, to be sure. So the question is, was he helping his brother out, or was he lording it over him because he could at that point in time? So it certainly is a reasonable question to ask.
Maybe that could be a new Ryan Murphy feud, the Ford brothers. Getting back to the clause where Jane has to appear in Blanche's movies, in the film, I think the implication seems to be she's just trying to help her sister. But having just read the novel, it's very explicit that Blanche says, no, I did that because I knew how terrible she was and that she would look bad and people would say that. So you get the twist at the end that Blanche really was the manipulator, getting revenge, is an evil person. Whereas having rewatched the movie, I don't know, perhaps because Joan Crawford didn't want to go that far, or just some of it was internal to Blanche in the books. Unless it's expressed, we wouldn't know that. But I thought that did add yet another macabre twist. Blanche is getting her revenge on this sister who had treated her so badly when they were both children.
I wish they had gone farther. I wish they had done that, because I think knowing that she's a manipulator who has been suffering because of what she set up, that she's Dr. Frankenstein and she made the monster. The monster was already there, but she just added more fuel to the fire as far as, oh yeah, I'm going to get you these roles and help out my sister. And of course, we're one big happy family. We're going to stick together. But yeah, just look at her. Look at how funny this is. Look at how awful my sister is. And look at how great of a star I am. I'm the one that's going to win the awards.
Remember in that earlier scene that you mentioned, Mike, where people are murmuring outside the stage door, one of the murmurs, some lady says, I always say you have to blame the parents.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't go into a lot of it with the parents, but obviously Baby Jane was her father's favorite, and the mother just seems ineffectual and kind of lays back and lets whatever psychological abuse happen. So that's another aspect that you're saying. They didn't really go fully into that. I don't know if they go more in the novel, but they certainly didn't do it in the film.
There are moments in the novel where she talks about, oh, I would like to go live at the beach, and the best times I ever had were hanging out with Daddy at the beach. And we don't really get that here. Of course, they return to the beach at the end. But for me, it's when our boy Victor Buono as Edwin Flagg is looking through all of that sheet music, and every single freaking song has Daddy in the title. And I'm just like, who wrote this sheet music? Was this Elektra herself? What's happening here? That's when it comes up, and I'm just like, oh man, this is creepy how much she loved her daddy. And the way too that Bette Davis says daddy, just that emphasis on the syllables, really just every time she does it, it just hits me.
There's not many scenes in any movie creepier than when she's singing the song with Buono accompanying her.
Off key, caterwauling.
Otto and I both agreed at the end when, I know, spoiler alert, but I guess you tell everybody, we presume you've seen this. When Jane is dancing on the beach, it would have been even better if she started singing the song.
And let's give Victor his props for really, like I said at the beginning, this time around, I really saw the campiness of the film, but maybe not intentional campiness, whereas Victor Buono, he injects humor into this, and it's obviously on purpose, what he does, just his looks and stuff like that, which I think is a nice break from some of the tension. Although maybe if you're watching it the first time, you don't even exactly know how to respond to his responses to it. But he's got his own parental issues and hang-ups with his mother or his secretary as he tries to pass her off. But there's parts of it where he's just very funny just by what he's doing with his face, because he walks into that house, and once he sits down at the piano, and that look he gives when he's looking at all of the sheet music, he's already thinking like, oh, dear God, do I need the money this bad? What have I gotten myself in for? I kind of like the fact that he was the one that was able to purposely bring some humor to it without changing the meaning in any way.
Actually adds to the viewer's appreciation, because as he's going through those books, we don't see most of the pictures, but from his expression, we get a good sense of just how grotesque all of this is. And yet we also know, as you say, he wants the gig. He's desperate for money, and he senses that it's a big, expensive house. There must be money here. So it just, when he's like encouraging Jane in her delusions, it's both amusing but also very pathetic at the same time.
Yeah, he's a phony, a shyster, whatever, you con man as well, whatever you want to say. They're talking about the money, and she's saying, I don't know if I can get it that quickly. And you see him pulling back and losing interest. And then when she says, I can have 500 or whatever it is for you by tomorrow, then immediately he gets all enthusiastic again and says, oh, great, you're going to be out there again. It'll be a whole new career. All this BS.
He reminds me a little bit of Ignatius J. Reilly when it comes to, he doesn't want to work. He hates everything around him. Nothing is good enough for him. He thinks he's better than everybody else. That comes through, I think, a little bit more in the book than in the movie. But this whole thing of, the weird relationship he has with his mother, he seems to just despise her, doesn't even want her to talk or anything. He's just, it's like nails on a chalkboard every single time this woman opens her mouth. But using her to be his secretary and trying to get this money, chisel this money out of Jane. I'm like, all right, because he doesn't want to work, and he knows that his mother is not bringing in any income, and he really actually wants to eat. He likes his food, definitely. Yeah, I thought that he played that very well. And he's as close to, I think first it's Elvira, the maid, who's our surrogate as far as experiencing these two from an outside point of view, maybe even the neighbor, Mrs. Bates. I think it switches from Bates to Elvira to, once Elvira's out of the picture, to Edwin. And that's when we really get to experience, like, he gets to go in the house. And so does Elvira, of course, but Mrs. Bates is always on the outside, so she doesn't get most of the picture. She just occasionally will see Jane or see something in the window up above. In those barred windows, the bars look really ominous on that house.
The bars are on the window, but there's clearly no glass. So Blanche could have yelled out to Mrs. Bates for help more than once. And
she definitely could
doesn't do it. Yeah.
In the novel, if I recall correctly, by the time it's much later in the novel that she throws the note. And by that time, she's really been starved and hasn't had water. So she actually tries to scream, but can't. And
that makes more sense.
That's a lost opportunity because, yeah, I understand for dramatic purposes, tossing the note out and then having Blanche find it. In the novel, Mrs. Bates puts it in her pocket and doesn't open it because there's some distraction. Also, by the way, Mike, you just made, I think, a very fascinating point as we celebrate Victor Buono. What a lost opportunity that he didn't star in a film version of A Confederacy of Dunces.
I think he would have been great, right?
I agree 100%. They've been trying to make a film of it for decades now, and for various reasons it's never happened. But who would have been better in such a role?
He left us too soon.
He did. Oh, maybe AI. We can make one with him now. It's not too late.
No, boo.
Oh, talk about horror.
So much of the book is with Blanche in her room and her thoughts. It reminds me a little bit of Gerald's Game, the Stephen King book. And sometimes she's even tied up. Just her there and the whole thing with the food terrorism and just that she gets so petrified by the dead bird. And I like that because I think it's just a dead bird from the garden. I don't think it's her bird. I think that adding it as her bird really brings that home. I don't even think the rat's in there. I think she just does
the novel.
I think they just do two things, right? One is the bird, and then the other one is sand in the food.
Put sand on Blanche's food, yeah.
Which is neat because it also ties into the beach. But she gets so petrified by it that she really starts to starve herself, doesn't want to take that cloche off or the white cloth that they put over the food in the book. And we spend a lot of time in her room with her. And then at one point, she just drops out of the narrative for a while to the point where I was wondering if she was dead. Like when they're trying to get that door open with her inside, I was like, is she dead in there? I don't know what's happening right now. I thought that they handled that very well, both in the book and in the movie, that she's just tied up. But again, to your point, Otto, like the Elvira's, I don't hear any noise. She's Adina in the book. She's like, I don't hear any noise behind the door. And I'm like, did she knock her out or what? Because if you're tied up, you can still at least go, make some noise. Twist that bar around, make something rattle. I don't know.
Isn't Elvira nervous in the movie that she's given her drugs and knocked her out with her prescription drugs? And Elvira, God bless her, she carries the torch of that great tradition of underestimating just how nuts the person is you're dealing with. Why would she... When Tim and I were watching it, I'm like, oh, come on, don't put the hammer down. Hold on to that hammer, for crying out loud.
Call the cops. Let the cops handle it.
And it's interesting because I am listening to the book, and in that, the Adina does not sound like she's black. The actress that is portraying her sounds more Southern. So I was glad to see that there was an African-American actress cast in this role. She's got some agency, but then, she gets killed. I'm like, okay. And kind of that old horror trope. First one killed is the black woman.
One of the articles I read was speculating that maybe that was done purposely because of the enslavement issue and turning it around. and having this black woman as being the only one who could maybe save her for a certain period of time, obviously, until she was killed. But I had never even thought of that. I never even put that together, but it's an interesting thought. I can't remember what article was I read that in. But you're right. You don't want to be a black character, especially in those days, in this kind of film. No good will come of it.
This might be the only one of these quote-unquote Hagsploitation films that I've ever watched. I went through the long list of some of the other ones. I want to see Lady in a Cage. Sounds interesting. And
yes, yeah.
Is it with Bette Davis playing twin roles? Or
I want to see Dead Ringer now, because I've heard of Dead Ringer, but I had never seen it. So I definitely want to see. I have to admit my ignorance. I had never heard the term Hagsploitation, but I read a whole article on it. It makes a lot of sense. You can't disagree with any of the claims in all those roles that came after this one. And certainly it probably gave not only Bette Davis and Joan Crawford, but it certainly gave a great later career to Shelley Winters, because she was in a few of them.
When she was younger, too.
That raises another interesting point, is the connection between this movie and Sunset Boulevard, which is sometimes considered, if not the first, one of the first Hagsploitation, because again, you have a very excellent actress from the past who was 50 years old, Gloria Swanson, and yet portrayed in a ghoulish sort of way in a decaying mansion surrounded by creepy people. And the William Holden character is not unlike the Victor Buono character. Someone just wants to make a buck, and initially at least willing to take advantage of this strange person, and then comes back to bite them both. And then in a way, it's almost like a mashup between Psycho and Sunset Boulevard. Strange people in a strange house, and yet, again, very distinguished actresses, Academy Award winners. After they made these movies, I think for the most part, Crawford and Davis, these were the sort of roles that they had, that they didn't seem to be offered other roles. And as you say, they set the groundwork for Debbie Reynolds and Shelley Winters and a bunch of other actresses of a similar era to play these roles. But it's both good and bad. Obviously, they were employed. I think Davis and Crawford both made good amount of money from Baby Jane, but I don't think it was their life's dream that this would be the kind of roles they would have for the rest of their careers.
Even after the first time I saw this, I don't remember exactly what I thought the first time, but over the years, I neglected to put this film in the heading of one of my favorite type of films, and that is movies about Hollywood, stories about Hollywood. And it really is that. We think of it more as like this horror film, but it really is a movie about Hollywood and what Hollywood does to you. Now, in Sunset Boulevard, of course, the delusions, the self-delusions, and the way people are treated by the system, all that, it bleeds. It's not only the old people in that movie that are the victim, but of course it bleeds into the younger group, primarily through William Holden, and destroys him as well. Whereas in this particular film, Baby Jane, it's just destroying the two of them. But it's still the same theme about how basically Hollywood just chews you up and spits you out. Once you're no longer of service to them, they have no need for you and you get tossed aside. Like Tim said, Gloria Swanson was maybe 50 in Sunset Boulevard. And of course, we know Bette Davis was, 54, I think, when she made this movie.
I don't think anyone knows what Joan Crawford's age was. That's a secret no one will ever find out.
Joan made sure of that.
But comparable of age.
Exactly. She couldn't have been more than 3, 4, 5 years older at the most. So she was still probably in her 50s as well. And they were just of no use anymore once they reached that point. And now, at least, I think probably because of the money and the fact that actors now, as soon as they make some good money, if they're lucky enough to make some good money, they start their own production companies and they invest. The smart ones have learned from the lessons of the past. So they take a little more control of their careers and have a little more power. But back in those days, it just wasn't possible.
That's true. But on the other hand, a lot of this still continues. Think of Demi Moore and The Substance, which was a horror movie about a once beautiful actress and now doing everything she can, try to get her career back. And it's incredibly more grotesque than anything we saw in Baby Jane. And that was supposedly going to get her finally an Academy Award. And then it turns out, in fact, Mikey Madison getting it. Some said maybe it's like All About Eve, or the whole idea it's the young actresses that are still going to get the awards. And you reach a certain age, unless you're Meryl Streep, and a few, even Susan Sarandon, perhaps, you're not going to get the kind of roles you once had. And so you have to take on these extreme sort of roles.
I want to go back to what you guys were saying as far as Psycho and Sunset Boulevard. The houses in those movies are always fascinating to me. The mausoleum that Norma Desmond lives in, the idea of the tall staircase that Arbogast goes up and finds the shape of the body of the wife. I think that's actually the sister finds the shape in the bed where Norman's mother was. This whole idea of keeping these things up in the attic, the flowers in the attic kind of thing. Keep mom up in the attic and then towards the end, bring her down and throw her in the cellar. But this whole thing of keeping her up there, keeping Blanche away from everybody, it's a nice thing where it's just like this thing that's up there, it's in the consciousness. I always talk about how houses are like the subconscious, the conscious, and the id type of thing, but it's up there. It's still hanging out, and you'll never forget it, and especially you won't forget it with that damn buzzer going off all the time. I don't know if they could have found a more annoying buzzer, and Blanche, I would probably have some problems with Blanche as well for doing that. I don't know if I would serve her rat or anything, but I would definitely say, hey, just one time. You don't have to keep buzzing that.
I'd serve her a dead bird at least for that. No, in fact, of course, that's not in the novel either, which shows how movies can add, because just that annoying noise, you're right. Every time you hear that buzzer, you're more sympathetic to Jane. It's like, that, if she wasn't already a little out there, that would definitely drive you over the edge.
Since you guys are one up on me by having read the novel, is Joan Crawford's character's wheelchair ballet where she just goes around in a cyclone-like circle? Is that in the novel?
No, but I love that. I love that when she just keeps spinning, like, I have no idea what, I'm so confused. Yeah, that's great.
That's when I couldn't take it seriously anymore.
I'm sure someone has probably done this, but we both said they should put yakety sax in the music there. It's Bad Benny Hill episode. The other thing about the house, as opposed to Sunset Boulevard and Psycho, in those two cases, the house is isolated and just away from everyone. Whereas here, I think both the novel and certainly in the movie, you got neighbors that are so close that it's like a suburban area. It's described in the novel as a nice house, but not a big mansion or anything. So it's almost like a combination. You got the creepy house, but right in what looks like a pretty nice neighborhood.
And everything in that house seems like it's gray, like the wallpaper, everything just seems so dingy to me. And it's very appropriate. I don't know how Elvira would feel with me saying that, but the house is not bright inside. The house is so shadowy and with all those lamps and just the bric-a-brac going around. I'm surprised there's not stuffed birds every place.
To be fair to Elvira, she only came once a week.
That's true.
You got to cut her a little slack.
Also, the movie takes place in 1962.
It takes place yesterday. Thank you very much.
Oh, okay. And the automobile accident, was it 1935?
I think so, yeah.
So basically, we're talking 27 years that we can assume neither of them have worked.
Yeah, they're living off Blanche's royalties or the money she had made and was invested, because it becomes clear that's dwindling away, is why she has to sell the house. And of course, which we learned pretty early on, Jane is listening and knows about that and doesn't want the house sold.
Right. And at some point, we can also assume there was a steady stream of money going to the liquor stores on a regular basis.
That whole thing with Jane's superpower, I think she can imitate Blanche's voice a little bit, but I love that whole thing where it's just Joan Crawford's voice coming out of Bette Davis' mouth.
That was a little creepy, I thought, too.
So it reminds me of Beetlejuice doing Winona Ryder's character's voice in Beetlejuice.
Maybe I should answer for her, okay?
I'm Lydia Dietz, and I'm of sound mind. The man next to me is the one I want. You ask me, I'm answering. Yes, I love that man of mine.
It's amazing to think that Victor is only 26 in this movie.
It's astonishing.
He had only been doing, now I know he probably had roles on stage and things, but he had only been acting in TV for 3 years at this point. This is, as we mentioned, his introductory role, special call out in the credits. And these days, sometimes they'll say, oh, and introducing, and it's like, how many times have they introduced this character? But this is real. This is his introduction to the world of movies. And yeah, he just kills it. I think he's great. And I think some of those great little touches that he has with his mom, like when he's grabbing his face and he's just, so frustrated and stuff. I love it.
And you sort of see some of those Buono mannerisms that you will then recognize so well later on in the later things that we may have, like, I don't know about you, Mike, but for Tim and I would imagine the first time we saw Victor Buono was either Batman or The Odd Couple, one or the other.
Wild West.
Oh, Wild West.
The Count in that, yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, for me, it was definitely King Tut.
He was my favorite villain. And actually, in addition to being a horror fan, I was a big comic book reader. So I read the Batman before it was cool, or obviously before it became such a huge industry. And I knew that the main villains, like the Joker and the Riddler and the Penguin, they were all in the stories, but there was no King Tut. That was a very different kind of take on a villain. And the other thing I liked was a kind of Jekyll and Hyde variation, that he'd be this awful villain, then he'd get hit in the head, and he was this kindly professor of Egyptology saying, Batman, what's going on? And since I teach ethics, it's always been an interesting question. If someone really doesn't know that they committed a crime, can they be held responsible? So that always made me interested in Buono anyway.
I had actually forgot about that Jekyll Hyde aspect of King Tut's character. Now that you say it, I remember, but I had forgotten that. And it brings an interesting parallel with Bruce Wayne, although Bruce Wayne knows that he's Bruce Wayne, but being someone other than the guy behind the mask is interesting. And of course, please let us give a shout out to the great Otto Preminger as Mr. Freeze. I always loved Otto Preminger as Mr. Freeze.
That was where I knew Otto Preminger from before I knew he was a director.
Yes, I remember seeing Stalag 17, and it was so bizarre to see him as his commandant, having known him as Mr. Freeze. I think George Sanders was Freeze. It was one of the Mr. Freeze. Getting back to All About Eve.
George Sanders, just like there was at least two Riddlers because in addition to Gorshin, there was John Aston, too.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
So, yeah, some of them had multiple.
Victor Buono was definitely a man of his time because from 1962 until around the time of his death, he seemed to have been constantly employed. Not so much in movies. We'll obviously be looking at some of the other film roles he had, but if you go to IMDb, it's hard to see a TV show from that period that he wasn't in.
Yeah, he was like ever present when I was growing up because you look at all those 70s TV shows and he's just every place. And that was my era of watching TV when I was a kid. Oh, yeah, he was always there. And seeing him in movies was an oddity for me because I didn't watch a lot of the films that he was in. It was mostly television.
One of my favorite of his roles on television in the, I don't know if it was late 70s or early 80s, because the show stretched across, was as Jim Ignatowski's father in Taxi, which was just a fabulous episode and it was just so well written. All those episodes of that show are well written, but I loved him as Ignatowski's father. He was just great.
You are not without charm, my son. Thanks. All right, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'm willing to try if you are. If you want to be my son, feel what it's like to be a rich man and come home, enroll in school, I'll see that you get the best education and the best shave that money can buy.
And of course, that gets back to Mike's point about Buono's age. You see him as Christopher Lloyd's father and you believe it. It's very credible. And yet I think they were roughly the same age.
It is remarkable to see how he ages. Yeah, because this is, like I said, 26 years old, I think. And he died when he was 43. Is that right? It's wild because you look at him here and you look at him just, what would that be? 26, 43. Is that 16 years later when he dies?
Yeah. Victor Buono was 8 months older than Christopher Lloyd.
Wow. But you see him and he goes from this stage to the grayer hair. He starts to lose his hair pretty early on. He keeps those beautiful blue eyes through all of this, but otherwise he starts to change all around the facial features. Yeah, it's remarkable to see what a difference it is.
Yeah, that's incredible. 8 months difference, and he was playing. I wonder if that's the all-time.
Now, if it was a woman, she could be like 10 years younger and then play his mother, right?
What was the movie with Sally Field and Tom Hanks where he was a comedian and she plays his mother and they hit
Punchline?
But when you're saying that, I'm also thinking of Forrest Gump.
That's true too, yeah. But it just shows how the inequality, as it were, of male and female casting. I think my favorite Victor Buono appearance on TV was in The Odd Couple, where he played the exorcist. But that was the sort of thing. He could just appear for a few minutes and just dominate. But it was like enough, too. I think one of the problem, I know it's often been said of Paul Lynde and other such people that they could never really carry a series because too much of them was too much. They were like a spice, a little addition. And that's in this movie. It's just the right time when you're caught with these two rather unpleasant sisters. Then suddenly it shifts and now you get this other character and initially wondering how's he going to interact? What's his role going to be? And when he comes to the house, it adds so much, but then he disappears for some time. And of course, he was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, which is pretty amazing for his first role.
First time out.
Yeah. I'm so surprised that Crawford didn't get nominated for Best Supporting Actress.
That, of course, that's obviously a big part of Feud, the TV show. I suppose it's again because she chose that part. Apparently, she was the one who told Aldrich that she wanted to play Blanche and suggested Bette Davis for the role of Jane. And I would presume she thought this is the better role because it's more sympathetic, but it turned out she didn't do herself any good in that regard.
Crawford was unwilling to let herself be seen in such an unflattering light as Davis was. And then, as we said earlier, Bette just added to the grotesquerie, as it were, and went way over the top and just chewed the scenery. But it obviously worked because Blanche really pales in comparison when you see the film. She's almost like an afterthought, but she doesn't pop out of the screen the way Davis very obviously does and purposely does. Maybe the whole legend of Crawford. Now, it is true. Apparently, it's verifiably true that she did go around to the other nominees and say, if you're not going to be there, I'll be happy to accept the award for you on Oscar night if you win. What we don't know for certain is what Davis always maintained, and that was that Crawford also influenced voters to not vote for Davis. So that one will never really know the truth, although Bette certainly believed it.
Obviously, we don't know one way or the other. It does seem that to be nominated for such a role is one thing, but like Anne Bancroft won for The Miracle Worker, and that seemed more likely to get legitimate votes, as it were. You didn't need a campaign to say, don't vote for Bette Davis. Frankly, it seems to me it was very clever on Joan Crawford's part, because we know she wasn't happy she didn't get nominated. And so for her to pick up the award, it was a win-win, because if Bette Davis had won, she had a percentage of the profits. It's hard to believe that someone who supposedly had the business savvy of Crawford would have said, to hell with that. I want her to lose, so I'm going to lose millions of dollars because of it.
Davis says exactly that. She says it was foolish on Joan's part because had I won, it would have meant more money for both of us, because the films always get a bump when someone wins the Academy Award. I can't remember which interview, who she was being interviewed by, but she basically says that it was a miscalculation on Crawford's part to campaign against me, because had I won, the film would have done better and we would have made even more money.
As you say, we don't know that Crawford actually did campaign against her. It could be just sour grapes on Bette Davis's part. There's always endless debates on who should have won Academy Awards versus who did win them. But although I love the performance and it's a camp classic, it would just seem a little odd if that was the Best Actress award as opposed to the others who were in the running that year.
So speaking of that, let's go ahead and take a break, and we'll be back with an interview with Dominic Burgess, who played Victor Buono in the series Feud, and we'll be back with that right after these brief messages.
Classicy is a film journey to the East, a curated streaming service offering the best of contemporary and classic cinema from Eastern Europe and Asia. Using coupon code Mike50, you can get Classicy membership for just $5.50 a month, giving you the opportunity to sample award-winning films, documentaries, silent masterpieces, classic comedies, and more. You could also get access to the Classicy Journal, exclusive cast and director interviews, video essays, and watch lists. Visit klassiki.online and sign up now to start your adventure in film.
Our lives are the sum of our choices.
bring home Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning on digital now. Tom Cruise stars as Ethan Hunt in this action-packed thrill ride that critics are calling the biggest and wildest mission yet. Go inside the incredible stunts with over 50 minutes of jaw-dropping extras when you buy on digital. Available at participating retailers. Rated PG-13 from Paramount Pictures. Before we even start to talk about Feud, I want to know a little bit more about your background. Can you tell me how you got involved in acting?
A long time ago now. Let me take it back to the 90s. I didn't really have any interest in acting until probably midway through high school. I joined the drama club at high school just as an extracurricular activity. In the first year that I did it, we did cabaret, and I was just ensemble, but it was a fun time. It was fun. It was silly. And then the following year, I think I would have been maybe 14, 15, my English teacher, Mrs. Godridge, said that the school play was going to be Death of a Salesman, and I didn't know the play. I wasn't really up on plays and shows at that point in time. But she said audition, and I auditioned, and I got the role of Biff, and then that opened my eyes, and I fell in love with acting and everything therein very swiftly. I was always a fan growing up as a kid. I loved films. I loved TV. I would race home from school to catch Star Trek: The Next Generation, and I was a fan of X-Files and Buffy and Twin Peaks and all these shows. And so I loved film, but I never really put much stock into, that's something that I could do as a career. That felt like a world away. I think for a while I was hoping to be a veterinarian, something along those lines. So I did that school play, Death of a Salesman, and that was it. Then I was in. I got the bug, and that's then all that I wanted to do. And from there, it was a slippy slope. Instead of going into veterinary sciences, I decided to audition for drama schools in London just to see what might happen. And then I got offered a place at a drama school called the Academy of Live and Recorded Arts. I got offered a scholarship, a Dance and Drama Award scholarship, and that was it. That was my choice. Then I took away the choice because that was then like, okay, they believe in me and I could do it, and they'll pay the tuition, and that was it. Then we were off to the races, I guess.
With dance and drama, did you have to do much dancing?
Oh, they didn't try too hard. I went to a place called the Academy of Live and Recorded Arts, and one of the reasons that I chose that drama school, it closed, unfortunately, during COVID, so it doesn't exist anymore. But at the time, it was one of the only drama schools that really had a focus on classical training and training for television and film and radio and voiceover. In my heart at that time, I really knew that television and film was the direction that I wanted to focus in. Dance-wise, there was a little bit of tap involved, and we did have Denise for jazz and movement and aerobics, and Hannah Law Orthman was a movement teacher. So there were some dancing components. And then as you went further down the school, you could sort of diversify into areas that you wanted to go in. So if you were particularly good at stage fright, then you could go down the BADC route and learn extra weapons, I guess, other than foil and dagger. And then people would be fighting with long swords and staffs, and then people could go into extra dance lessons, and then there was a singing group. So you could diversify within that. But dance, as a 6'5", 300-pound man, was not for me.
Well, I suppose movement is very important, especially you've done a lot of roles where you're behind a lot of makeup, so you have to really work on the body as your instrument.
Yes, movement, absolutely. So a lot of that was Hannah Law Orthman did a lot of movement, and our improv teacher, John Mowat, also did a lot of physicality. Improv at my drama school stemmed from something called Commedia dell'arte, which is a lot of mask work, from Italy. And so through that, we did a whole lot of movement. But Mike, what's funny is, I don't know if it's funny, but I'll tell you the story anyway. At drama school and plays that I did in high school, because I'm a big guy, I'm 6'4", 6'5", and 300 pounds. And so I would find myself being cast in whatever plays that we were doing each term. I would be your Dr. Shibukin in Three Sisters, and I would find myself being the grandfather or the father, or playing someone so much older than my age, or playing someone that had a distinctive voice or distinctive mannerisms. And throughout my whole time at drama school in 3 years, I think I only ever played my own age once. And so going through that and doing that, I did do a lot of vocal and physical training. And whenever we did the public productions, I would go to the movement teacher and I would go to John Mowat and the voice teacher, John Wilde, and I'd say, oh, I got to play a 75-year-old. Let's talk about physicality. Let's talk about this. And then when I left drama school, it was a real deconstruction on auditioning, because I didn't know how to play my own age when I left drama school. And I'd be going to these auditions, and when you audition for television and film, it's just be yourself. Just be yourself. It's you. And I didn't know how to do that. I'd be going to auditions being like, how does a 21-year-old walk? How does he move? I'm like, I'm 21. So it was a real deconstruction then. And I still think in some ways it really helps me out having that training, because then, like you say, working on something like The Magicians or Star Trek or Star Wars, anything that's in prosthetics, big character, Victor Buono, it really helps you out to embody that. But I still sometimes struggle just playing a regular everyday person, because my natural instinct is to say, oh, how does this person talk? What are his intonations in his speech? Does his voice come from his chest, from his belly, from his neck, from his head? And so I think sometimes I might overcomplicate things instead of just being like, I'm just going to talk like a human being.
Did I read right that you got your first role like the day you graduated from college?
I did. I auditioned for Batman Begins. I think it was Lucinda Syson's office. And I went in with, I think Elaine Granger was the casting associate. And that was the day that I graduated from the Academy of Live and Recorded Arts. I raced into central London that morning and auditioned for that. And I auditioned for the role of an Arkham Asylum escapee. The audition was intimidating a kid in the Narrows with a knife. I didn't take a knife to the audition. I'm very professional. And I got that role, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is wow. And then in England, I guess it's still the done thing. They pick you up from your residence, and then they drove us 45 minutes, and they were filming in these 2 huge airport hangars that used to house blimps. And I got there, went through hair and makeup, went through wardrobe, and then the hair and makeup and wardrobe team, bless them, were like, well, wait, you're too clean cut and nice looking to be an Arkham Asylum guy. Let's figure something out. And then I got turned into a Narrows cop, and I lost my line, but it was still what a wonderful environment. And then I was cut from the final film, but my name still survives the credits. So I do get my £60 a year in my residuals. So thank you very much, Batman Begins. But it was a wonderful experience to be on set on a major motion picture. That's my first experience. And then my next job was Doctor Who, which was another, I was raised as Sylvester McCoy and Ace as my doctor and companion. So that was also very exciting to be involved in that and land into that genre world right away out of the gate, which is what I loved. And yeah, 2 wonderful jobs right out of the gate.
Rushing home and watching Star Trek Next Generation, how was it to work on Star Trek itself?
Honestly, Mike, that is still one of my career highlights. as soon as they announced that Patrick Stewart was coming back and that Picard was a go, I picked up my phone to my reps right away. I called my manager, Camilla Pines. I was like, they're bringing back Patrick Stewart. Picard is coming back. We've got to do what we can. And the casting director on that show was Liz Dean. And I had been into that office. She worked at an office at the time called UDK, who are actually casting directors on Feud. So they were aware of my work, but I wrote a little handwritten note to Liz Dean, and I went down there and I said, "Dear Liz, I used to race home from school every night to watch Star Trek Next Generation. And bless, she brought me in. She let me come in and read for Mr. Vup. And the night before I went in, I was having a bit of an existential crisis because it was so top secret. Everything was so clandestine and shut down, and there were no full scripts. And all I was told that I was an alien. And I was pacing the living room because my fiance is not a Star Trek guy. And so I was reading lines with him, and I was saying, it's very different. It's going to be very different if I'm a Klingon than if I'm a Cardassian, than if I'm a Ferengi, than if I'm as a bunch of different species, because I didn't know what I was supposed to be when I got in the room. And then I went for the audition. I went in the room, and Liz was just like, you're like a big lizard who can smell lies, and you're just like an immovable object. You're like a rock. And we did it, and I had a lot of stuff that wasn't in the final script. It was a lot of technobabble that was in the audition material. And oh boy, I kept tripping over all those lines. And it was way more than was ever in the final script. And bless Liz. We did it maybe 3 or 4 times, and I kept stumbling at the same point. She was like, hey, do you want to take 5 minutes? And I was like, no, I promise, I'm prepared. I've worked on this so much. It's all I've ever wanted. And then she wrote the line that was my stumbling block, and she wrote it on a piece of card, and she held it above the camera so that I could get that line out. And I left that audition, and I called my manager, and I said, oh no, that was one of the worst auditions I've ever done in my life. I kept stumbling over this line, and Liz had to write the line down on this piece of card, and she's never going to call us in ever again. And then we got it. And that's the way it goes. Sometimes we shit the bed. And then I guess what we feel isn't necessarily what comes across on camera. And I had the most divine experience on there. Everyone was so wonderful. Jonathan Frakes was the director, who was so warm and so friendly. He ran such a great set. Patrick Stewart was incredible. In between setups, sometimes you work on shows, and in between setups, the series regulars or the other actors will disperse and go to their trailers, and they don't want to talk. And here, everyone just sat down and was talking, and Patrick would say, where are you from? And they're like, oh, I'm from Stoke-on-Trent. They'd be like, I worked at the Stoke-on-Trent Repertory Theatre back in 1978. And I was just a magical, wonderful, and for everything that I would hope that Star Trek would be, Star Trek was. It was a dream.
How was it being under all that makeup?
You know what? I quite like it. It's liberating in a way. What was really nice about the Star Trek makeup is it was so fast. The makeup people there were from Vincent van Dyke Effect. So basically it was a foam cowl. So it was just one piece that would go over your head and shoulders, and then just one piece of, I can't remember if the face piece was latex or foam, but just one piece that would go on the face. And then it was just a full suit. The hands were gloves. So they just went straight on. That wasn't a lot of work that needed to go on there. So comparatively, that was an hour and a half in that makeup chair. By comparison, the Magician's makeup took about 5 hours, and the Rebel Moon and the Star Wars makeup, they both took 5-6 hours. That was a long old time in the makeup chair for those. But what was really nice is it was so easy, and it was low maintenance. So in between setups, you were able to just talk and chat with the other actors. On those other shows, on Magicians, I had the most wonderful time. But because I'm in big hooves, sort of stilettos that are cut out to match the sort of shape of a goat's leg, and the legs are furry and you're glued in, and then the horns, and the makeup was latex, and so the sweat gathers underneath that material, whereas with foam it absorbs it, but the latex sort of gathers, and they would have to put you into cooling tents. And so I found that the downside with working with latex prosthetics is it needs a little more TLC, and then you don't get to talk to the other cast members as much as you would like to in between setups to be like, oh, what's going on here today? But still, wonderful experiences. I quite enjoy it. Like I said, inhabiting something physically and vocally is exciting. For me, that's my sort of natural rhythm of getting into a character. So I think it also gets you out of your head a little bit more, because it is like mask work. And so you just play and explore through physical means as well as vocal means.
Before you played Victor Buono, had you played another real person before?
I did a show called Roots. They redid Roots, I think, back in 2013, 2014. And I played people on stage. I think I played Sir Robert in a production in England. And then I played someone in Roots that was a real person. But historically, the only frame of reference you have is a painting and handwritten documents. And so there's no vocal information. No one could watch that and be like, hold on a minute, that wasn't what that person was really like. When it came to Victor, I think this was the first time that I played someone real, where there's a plethora of documentation about what he looked like and what he sounded like, and first-hand accounts of what he was like as a human being. And he had poetry albums, and so there was a lot of reference points for him. And when I went into audition for that at the same office that did Star Trek, UDK, I knew that I was auditioning for Victor, but because the scripts had not been written to that point, the material that I was given were scenes from Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, but they wanted me to be playing Victor Buono, but still Edwin Flagg. And so it was this weird place of, am I playing Victor Buono, or am I playing the guy that he played in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane? And casting was like, we don't know, why not both? But again, a wonderful experience audition-wise. The associate at that time, Jenny Treadwell, had cast me on a show called Ant Farm a few years before, and she knew that they were casting Feud, and she had built a vision board with pictures of me from Ant Farm and pictures of Victor Buono side by side in the same kind of poses. And she was like, you got to bring in Dominic Burgess. He's going to be perfect for this. And they gave me the note beforehand, come dressed in the style indicative of that. So I had to match what Victor, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. And I did my hair and I gelled it to one side. And yeah, we had fun with the audition. We played it as Victor Buono, and we played it as he did in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. I think this was in February, and I don't think I heard until April that I had been cast. Then we didn't start filming until late September, October. So it was a sort of a long stretch of time in between auditioning and working on that then. But yeah, then fun to go down those avenues where he moved and vocally where he lived. And yeah, another wonderful, incredible experience.
Were you familiar with him before you got the call to do the audition?
If you'd have told me, hey, do you know Victor Buono? I would have been like, no, I don't think I do. But then going down the rabbit hole of, oh, he was King Tut in Batman. I know him from Batman. And then Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, and be like, oh yeah, I remember watching that film. I know who he is. He's in Planet of the Apes. I know who he is in Planet of the Apes. oh, he's in my favorite animated film from when I was a kid, Flight of Dragons. I know, okay. And actually, funny, speaking about Ant Farm, there was a producer and writer on Ant Farm, Mark Jordan Leakin. And when I got cast on that show, it was a Disney show. One of the very first things that he said to me was like, you know why I loved your audition? Because it reminded me of Victor Buono. And he kept saying, you should look up Victor Buono. You should look up Victor Buono. And I remember looking it up at the time and like, oh, I see the resemblance. But it wasn't until I got the audition for Feud that I really went down the rabbit hole of investigating his body of work.
Mm-hmm. As we've been talking, you dip in and out of like American accents and stuff. How was it finding the voice of Victor Buono? Was there a particular like phrase or something that really got you into that?
No, I don't think so. I listened to his poetry albums. I listened to how he talked on some talk show appearances that he talked on. And I wanted to make sure that I was honoring it without becoming slavish to an impersonation, so that then on set, if anything different is thrown at you, or you're sitting in the hair and makeup trailer and someone comes along and it's like, hey, we got new pages for the day, that then I wasn't frazzled and like, uh-oh, I haven't studied this for 6 hours, and so I don't know what to do. And so you find your own rhythm. I find that if I'm playing someone real, I'll examine their voice and their mannerisms to a degree, but there's still got to be room in there for me to be able to improvise, to be able to play, to be able to inhabit them on the fly. And so I guess it becomes a case of what do you lose and what do you gain by sort of being so slavish to who they are. But yes, I try and figure out where he moved from, where he vocally resonated, and took it from there.
Some of my favorite scenes in the whole miniseries or series, I suppose it is, were you and Susan Sarandon in your interactions, whether it was her bailing you out of jail or that beautiful conversation that you have where you're getting to know each other. What was that like to work with her?
Great. It's such a wonderful environment in terms of, sorry to keep hopping on, I'd worked on Farm back in 2012, which I think was a run of 15, 16 episodes, but each episode is standalone. There's no sort of, you don't want to say there's no character development. It's a Disney show. It's light, it's fluffy. And then Feud, I think, was the first time in a long time that I had a job and it was like, hey, this is going to be 5-6 months. You're going to be inhabiting this character. So it was nice to go on that entire journey and to watch Susan Sarandon work, whose work I was familiar with. And I'm a big fan. I think it was a deep cut for her. I love Cloud Atlas. I know it's not for everyone, but she plays like 6 different characters in that film. And so I think the first time I met her, I was like, tell me everything about Cloud Atlas right now. And just everyone on that set. Jessica was lovely. It was the first time meeting Ryan Murphy, and he was great. But the directors, Gwyneth Horder Payton, she was the one that directed that scene where Susan and I are on the couch, and she was very clear about what she wanted. And she'd come in and she'd say, okay, so we're going to do an establishing shot, then we're going to move the camera here. It's going to be intimate. I think Ryan had such a clear vision for what he wanted. With that, I think Ryan in general has a very clear vision for what he wants. And that whole creative team, I became friends with Alfred Molina, who is simply the most divine human being. Alison Wright, Tanase Popa, who's one of the producers. Working on Feud led to so many other wonderful things. Going back to the genesis of when I arrived in Los Angeles, there was a kids sitcom called iCarly, and I must have auditioned for that show just 1 line, 2 line, 3 line, over and over again. Must have been 13, 14 times. And Jenny Treadwell was the casting assistant or associate in that office, and I never booked. And then she kept me in mind when they were looking for this person on Ant Farm and brought me in and was like, you should meet Dominic Burgess. And then I worked on Ant Farm, and then she moved office again to UDK where they were doing, and she was like, you should meet Dominic Burgess. And then you work on Feud. And from working on Feud, that's how I met Taylor, who did Ma and Breaking News in Yuba County, and Palm Royale that I'm working on now. Here we are in the year of our Lord 2025. I can trace everything that I'm working on now all the way back to when I first got to LA in 2007 through auditions that you didn't get at the time. But it's so interesting, and Feud has led to so many wonderful things.
You talked about that challenge of being 6'5", 300 pounds. I imagine that was a huge challenge for Victor Buono as well, and not being able to take that many roles. I love that you're able to just move through these different roles. For me, it seems so easily because every time you are on screen, you just embody a completely different character. There's no, oh yeah, there's Dominic. Sometimes you're unrecognizable, not just with the makeup, but just with the performance.
Sometimes I feel like I get in my head a little bit on that. If I get an audition in for something, sometimes I do worry that I stand in my own way because I'll do an audition and they're like, nope, that's the voice that I used in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. I got to find something different. And then I'll be like, oh no, that's mid-Atlantic, transatlantic kind of Victor Buono-ish. I want to move away from that because I've done that. And people will be like, he's just doing the same thing again. So sometimes I get in my head. Again, I think it goes back to that training thing that I can do an American accent, and sometimes I should just be able to do that and talk and do the audition, and I don't. I get in my head a little bit about I've got to do something different or something physically different or vocally different, and sometimes I don't think I do. But I appreciate that. I'll take that compliment because I do love playing and exploring. I love watching actors who disappear into roles.
Oh, yeah.
I love watching actors who change physically and vocally and surprise me. And I enjoy the character work. I really enjoy the character work. And I think that when you get a script for something, it's one of the first things that I do is where these characters live in their body. How do they sit? How do they move? How do they open a door? What do they do in their living room? How do they relax? That's a fun part of the process for me. But I am aware in the back of my head, like, you've done this before, do something different. And maybe I'd book more roles if I just let it go. I'm like, that worked for me on the last job. I'm just going to do the same thing all over again.
I think it'd be the modern day Al Pacino. He just does the same thing over and over again now.
Yeah. Hey, look, it works for some actors. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. I get the audition material in and I just go with what my gut tells me. I used to, when I was a younger actor, when I was first starting out, I would get audition material and I'd strangle. When I was in England, I worked on Batman, I worked on Doctor Who, and then I was very lucky if I was getting an audition every 3 or 4 months or so. And so when an audition did come in, you'd strangle that material because you'd want it so much that it'd be like, oh gosh, I've got to get this job. What does the casting director want? I've got to please the casting director. And it just became about pleasing other people instead of getting the material and saying, okay, great, this is a material. This is my interpretation of the role. Hey, do you want some apples? Because I'm bringing apples to this production. And if production's like, nah, we want oranges. I'd be like, okay, great. Thank you so much. When you want apples, come get me because I got apples. That's a terrible analogy, but then I can put my head on my pillow at night and get an audition, do what I want to do with it, finish the audition, rip up the material, put it in the trash, and then say, I'm letting it go. I release it into the universe. Sometimes auditions come along that take hold and you really want them for one reason or another, whether it's the role and it's, oh my gosh, I love this material so much, or it's the location where it's going to be filming. What? I'll go to Tahiti for 3 months. Are you kidding me? Yes, please. Whatever it is, there's different reasons behind why you would want to do something, and they're all valid. But now I'm much better about letting things go.
With you being married to another actor, do you guys workshop stuff together? Because he does a lot of stunts too. Does he teach you how to take a punch?
Matthew Yannickia, his background is in stunts. And, oh gosh, I don't want this to be a leading cause of our divorce. I'm joking. We approach auditioning very differently. I will get material and then I'll go and work on it in my own space and find physically and vocally where it lives, and I'll prepare it. And then when I go to Matt and say, hey, I'm ready to tape, it's in a loose place, and I'm not so slavish on being word perfect. I'd rather get the intention of the character and the feeling and the emotion of the scene. And that doesn't always work if you're auditioning for a sitcom. They tend to be more word perfect and specific. If you're auditioning for a crime procedural that's on CBS, they tend to be more word perfect and specific. If it's for a feature film, it tends to be a little looser. If it's for a pilot where you're going to be playing that character for years, then I tend to be a little looser and inhabit it in a different way. I think because Matt's background is in stunts, he approaches it from the opposite direction, where things have to be perfect and timed, because that's what stunt people do. Things have to be precise and timed and come at the right moment, because if they don't come at the right moment, people will take a punch to the face and that's the shot ruined. So it is interesting that we come at things from a different way, but I learn things from him. I think he learns things from me. He took classes at UCB and Groundlings and did a lot of improv and got out of that sort of, not a rigid headspace, but that sort of precise headspace. And I love being in class. I'm in class all the time. And so if I feel like my skill set is getting a little balanced, then I'm like, oh, I feel a little rigid, I'm going to jump into a class at UCB for a while. Oh, I feel like I've gotten a little too loose, I'm going to jump into a scene study class and I'm going to course correct. I went way off topic there again. But yes, we self together, and it's handy now in the world of self-tapes where we're auditioning in our own living rooms to have each other on hand to be like, whoop, I got this audition, it's due in 24 hours, I'm going to learn it, then let's do it. And if Matt is out of town, he's in Vancouver right now, and then he's got a stunt job in Toronto. And so while he's out of town, then I have another sort of 2 or 3 people that I can pick up the phone and be like, well, I got an audition, let's go. In my sort of social circle and work circles have got 3 or 4 people they call for self-tapes to be like, it's time, let's go. And then there are self-taping facilities. If everything falls apart, and you're like, oh, okay, time to go to Ace Tapes, time to go to Lucky Rabbit Studios. Yeah.
That's got to be such a different world. Was that all just because of the pandemic, or were they doing that beforehand?
There were moments, I think the only times that I did self-tapes before the pandemic were if I was out of town. I think I was in New Orleans when I got the audition for The Magicians. And so that was a self-tape. That's the only one that I can remember off the top of my head before the pandemic. And then we went into pandemic times, and then everything shifted very quickly to self-tapes. Dr. Death was a self-tape. I think Palm Royale was a self-tape. Ma was a self-tape. That became the norm very quickly. And there are pros and cons to each thing. I love going into the room and meeting a casting director, or seeing a casting director that you know, that you love going into. I used to love going into Wendy O'Brien's office. Wendy O'Brien does It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. She did Legit. And she was in an office at 2233 Barry Avenue. And you would go into that office and she was so warm, and she'd give you a hug, and you would do the scene a couple of times and she would play, and it was loose, and you'd improv, and you'd come out of that office feeling so good about yourself, that you worked, that you played, that you explored with the scene. And now with self-tapes, you don't get that interaction. You put yourself on tape and it's in a vacuum and you send it off. And in some ways it's good, because you're like, okay, this is what I want to do with the character. I'm putting it on tape and I'm sending it out, and that's what it is. I like self-tapes. I love being in the room. I'm not a fan of Zoom auditions. The live Zoom auditions is where it loses it for me, because with a self-tape, you're in control. You have your reader and you can do it on your own schedule. You can do the audition in the morning, evening, afternoon, night, whenever you want to do it, whenever works for you, which is great. When it's a Zoom audition, you're still in your home, but I don't know if trash collection is going to come on. I know it's going to come on Tuesdays and Fridays, and oh boy, they're loud, and they can come anytime between 7 a.m. and 12 in the afternoon. I don't know if my neighbors are going to be home. The upstairs neighbors sound like they opened a bowling alley. I have 5 cats. All their collars jingle. If they want to be fed, they'll let me know they want to be fed. So the Zoom auditions bring in a factor of unpredictability for me. And then there's a technical aspect, because if you're Zooming with someone and a production company is in Alberta, Canada, they might not have the best internet connection, and you're reading with someone and there's a delay, and it's a 2-second delay, and you're not sure, and my webcam doesn't look as good as the camera that I used the self-tape on, and yeah. Zoom auditions is where it loses it for me, but in the room and self-tapes I love.
You mentioned Palm Royale. What else are you working on these days?
We just finished season 2 of Palm Royale, and I again love all those people. Kristen Wiig is a delight. Alison Janney is a delight. Carol Burnett is a delight.
That's TV royalty right there.
Just what a treat to be in that environment. I just finished a show on Amazon called Criminal that I think will be out in early 2026. That's based off a series of graphic novels. And then I have been doing some voiceover work for a new animated series, but I don't think I'm allowed to talk about that yet. That's NDA'd, and they haven't done a lot of announcements. So yeah, that's been keeping me busy. This month I'm working on some theater with a company called the Blank Theater. They have something called the Young Playwrights Festivals, which is where new playwrights between the age of 8 and 18 plays, and then they put them on with professional actors here in Los Angeles. And it's always wonderful to do fresh new work and see the writers of today are going to be the writers of tomorrow. And that's a little musical that we're doing. So we start rehearsals for that next week, which I'm excited about. Yeah. So there's stuff. It's slow right now, but there's stuff going on. I try and keep busy. I write as well, which keeps me busy. This week for Amazon Prime, I bought myself a piano. So I'm going to learn some piano, Mike. We'll see how that goes.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, who knows? I like keeping myself busy.
Somebody there is a musician. Is that you or your husband?
Oh, no, I don't know anything about guitars. One of them's acoustic, one of them's electric. That's all I know. But pianos I can get into.
Dominic, thank you so much for your time. This was so great talking with you.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Mike. This was a treat. Anytime I get to talk shop, it's always very exciting.
I've written a letter to Daddy. His address is heaven above. I've written, dear Daddy, we miss you and wish you were with us to love.
When do I get to play a real part instead of just being your stanza? Maybe when I think you're ready.
Come on, Blanche. We need you on your sister's marks. Thank you.
You seem to forget I was a star when your billing was still pioneer child killed by stampede.
Sam thinks she's crazy.
I'm talking.
The way she treats everybody, even you and Dad.
All right, we are back, and we were talking about whatever happened to Baby Jane. And yeah, let's talk a little bit more about Feud. I never watched that show before. I don't know why. I just didn't have any interest in checking it out, but I had to for this episode. And I had a great time with it. I was really impressed with that show, and I was really impressed with Jessica Lange. Holy shit. The performance that she gives as Joan Crawford, I thought was one for the ages. She really captured her so well.
Susan Sarandon, I think, also does a tremendous job as Bette Davis. There's even a slight resemblance. At least
There's definitely a resemblance.
The Susan Sarandon eyes, as it were. It's
right.
Definitely the resemblance is there. I just felt like she was good, but I didn't feel she was great. And I feel like her whole Bette Davis-ness turned on and off depending what the scene was. And towards the end, like episodes 6, 7, 8, I started to hear how she said Daddy, like that type of pronunciation that Bette Davis had. I would hear that in those later episodes, but I really wasn't hearing it in the earlier episodes. I felt like she's just being Susan Sarandon through this, whereas Jessica Lange, I felt that she was completely in the part. That if there was Jessica Lange inside of there, I wasn't seeing it. I was just seeing Joan Crawford. And that wasn't just from the makeup. I was hearing it in the voice. I was seeing it in the mannerisms. It just felt very Joan. Whereas like towards the end, and doesn't make sense because I don't think that they filmed this chronologically, but towards the end, I felt like, oh, now Susan Sarandon's really putting it on. She's putting on the Bette Davis-ness of this.
Maybe it's a persona that takes over. You got to be careful.
Next thing, she's criticizing her child's acting.
Remember, too, that Jessica Lange had Faye Dunaway's performance to look at. And, of course, Sarandon had there's never been a major film with Bette Davis as a character, like the actress Bette Davis as a character, as far as I know. So that was first. So maybe, but I thought they were both very good in it, quite honestly.
I thought the whole thing was great, and I was so happy to see Alfred Molina in here as Robert Aldrich. I really love Molina, and him going against Stanley Tucci I thought was wonderful, especially when he fucks Jack Warner over towards the end of the series, and you hear him clanging, talking about his big brass balls, and I'm like, fuck, that's so good.
Knock it around a little, maybe. I don't know.
That scene is great, especially since we know the movies that Aldrich is then going to make, the Dirty Dozen and all his other classics. Yeah, The Longest Yard.
Oh, yeah, his filmography is amazing. And yeah, he really hits a stride towards the end of his career. It's like he made some great films before it, but yeah, towards the end, he was just knocking them out of the park.
I even liked All the Marbles. It's not one of his greatest, but, the interesting Peter Falk film.
Is that the one with the lady wrestler?
Yes.
Yes. I'll be watching that soon for The Shabby Detective once we get up to later 7.
Not to go away from Feud, but I don't want to finish without going back to something you said at the very beginning, and that was the cinematography and how this film was shot. One of the things I was thinking about was I just showed to one of the classes that I was teaching on Jack Lemmon, we just saw Some Like It Hot. And of course, in Some Like It Hot, it was interesting because Marilyn Monroe was in Some Like It Hot. But at the time, Monroe always had a rider on her contract that said the film had to be made in color. And Wilder said, no, we can't make this in color because the boys would look too grotesque and they would never be able to pull it off. And so they had to get Arthur Miller to help convince Marilyn to do it in black and white. You got to believe that added to it in this movie, too, because I think it would have been too much if this movie were in color. But it made me think of that because I had just shown that film like the week before Tim and I watched this again. And when you see Bette Davis, it comes across as grotesque in black and white. And I think if you had done it in color, it would have been too much. And then really, again, it goes back to, would people have even taken it seriously because she really would have looked like a clown, or although maybe they wouldn't have even bothered with that kind of makeup if they had done it in color.
Send us a link to the remake that was done with Lynn and Vanessa Redgrave, which was in color. And for the reason I think Otto points out, I don't think, even though they're both great actresses, it looks dated and garish, but not in the garish way it should. And as a horror movie, it just looks bad.
Yeah, much more traditional clown makeup for that one, because I think she's even got like the smears of red on her cheeks and stuff. Yeah, I couldn't really make my way through that. The one that I could make my way through, though, was only half an hour long, and that was I couldn't believe this. So we'd been talking about camp and just dancing around this a little bit, talking about like how the influence on pop culture, the influence on gay culture of this movie is wild. It was embraced what was it called? The GGRC, and I'm trying to remember what GGRC stands.
Oh, yes.
The Good Girls Riding Club. They, a group of drag performers, basically did a half an hour version of what happened to Baby Jane, called What Really Happened to Baby Jane, months after the movie came out. It was embraced that quickly by gay culture, and it's all done, all drag. It's really good, very well done. Some of the special effects that they do with like the animations of the marquees, or like the tiny little Jane singing Letter to Daddy and stuff. It's remarkable. They did a great job and just embracing that grotesquerie. And it's funny. I'm watching this and I'm saying to my wife, here we are in 1963 watching all these drag performers redoing Baby Jane, and you could go through like all of the however many seasons of RuPaul's Drag Race, and they've probably done at least 2 or 3 parodies of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane or references to it. And I remember lines from Whatever Happened to Baby Jane through the lens of the parodies more than I actually remember the movie sometimes. So like when she says the line,
"You wouldn't be able to do these awful things to me if I weren't still in this chair." But you are, Blanche. You are in that chair.
I picture it, or I hear it in my head as, but you are, Blanche, you are, like really overdoing it like a drag performance would do.
You know, I haven't been able to use my legs since the accident. I'd escape from you if I wasn't 109 years old. But you're Blanche! Yeah! Look over here.
I thought that was pretty much how Bette did it.
She doesn't do it nearly as broad as I thought she did.
That's her fasten your seatbelt line for Baby Jane. But you are in the chair, Blanche. You are. Interestingly enough, it's funny that you say that now. I was thinking of it then, and then I forgot to say anything to Tim about it. But it's one of the rare times where, in that film at least, where you really hear her New England come out. Because she was a New Englander, right? Wasn't she from around Boston somewhere?
Yeah, you definitely hear that. Like when I said how Susan Sarandon embraces the Bette Davis-ness eventually in that performance, I really start to hear that. And the whole thing with her daughter, and when she talks with her daughter on the phone, I really hear the New Englandness of it.
And we didn't mention that was her daughter, Biddy, in the film.
Sorry, I was talking about the disabled daughter that she had put away. But yeah, BD, man, oh man, they are merciless to BD. Oh my gosh. just Mother, oh, don't worry, you'll be fine. And just the horrible line deliveries. That actress is great. I loved her in Sabrina the Teenage Witch.
Yeah. She was in Mad Men too as the daughter.
Yeah. I love her. And she did a great job of being a bad actress.
Otto and I had to agree that BD, the actress, is pretty bad in the few lines she has. But of course, that's interesting in Feud because we all know, of course, about Christina Crawford and Mommy Dearest, and she is referred to, but it never appears in the series. And then you see the twins who seem much closer to their mother. And yet you then see Bette Davis and her tortured relationship with BD, and we know that BD wrote a similar scorching book, but in her case, she published it while her mother was alive.
And I watched an interview with BD after that first book came out, and it, I'm sure you probably know, she was disinherited over that book, but she claims in this interview it was the only way she could talk to her, to get through to her mother, because her mother wouldn't listen to her or whatever. So it's bizarre as well. But Davis apparently had a very close relationship with her mother, but by most accounts, or at least anything I've read, it was a very good relationship. I don't know, but in this interview, BD mentions Joan Crawford and Christina Crawford and says, like, whenever she was in their company, the two of them, I don't think Joan liked me. She said it was like she wanted to keep Christina away from me because I would be a bad influence on her or something. But she also said something like, was Joan maybe a germaphobe too or something? But she said she had a lot of hangups. She said, even though Christina and I should have probably had a friendship of sorts, she said Joan never let her really even talk to me. Then, of course, don't forget, as I'm sure you both know this, but there were certain Hollywood people who, because as Tim says, Joan Crawford was dead when this book came out. But there were certain Hollywood people who were friends with Joan Crawford who were aghast at this book and excoriated Christina for having written it.
Didn't I read, too, with Feud that Olivia Dead was pretty miffed about this, too?
She sued. I think she was 101 years old and sued Ryan Murphy, I don't know, or defamation or whatever the basis was. I presume it didn't get very far, or maybe because she passed away, it ended. But Otto and I were saying, if you really wanted to do another version of Baby Jane, it would have been great to star Olivia de Havilland and Joan Fontaine, as they were two sisters who did hate each other. Might well have wanted to run each other down with the car.
And I do appreciate how they bring all that stuff into Feud as well. I was very curious. I like the structure of the whole series where we are cutting away to these interviews that are taking place well after the events that have happened in the past and bringing out, I thought Catherine Zeta-Jones looked absolutely amazing in that. But it was so weird how I was getting confused a lot of times because she's wearing a blonde wig, Kathy Bates is wearing a blonde wig as Joan Blondell, and then Judy Davis is wearing a blonde wig as Hedda Hopper. And there were times where they would start in a long shot and I'd be like, okay, which blonde is this now? Who am I looking at? Because I can't tell the difference sometimes.
Well, Judy Davis, a few times in the series, I don't know if it deliberately or not, reminded me of Bette Davis as Baby Jane. She was just so over the top, and his wild hair. I love Judy Davis as an actress, and I know nothing about the real Hedda Hopper or how accurate that was, but thought, yeah, maybe tone it down a bit.
When we're talking about Hopper, it makes me think of William Hopper, who, of course, was her son, who played Paul Drake for 9 years on the Perry Mason television show. And these old actors and actresses, the woman who plays Victor Buono's mother in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane is Marjorie Bennett, who appeared in 2 Barney Miller episodes later on. Tim reminded me of that.
I guess I don't recall that being talked about on the Life and Times of Captain Barney Miller. I'm going to have to file a grievance. We do need to give Marjorie Bennett a shout out because as an awful mother, she doesn't have many scenes in the movie, but she's very memorable.
She was the female equivalent of, oh, that guy. She was wonderful. She was in so many things, and she really was a great character actress. Just so great. And she was, I know that she was in 2 Barneys. The one I remember is where she's the lady who doesn't understand why they've brought her in, because she keeps writing checks for which she has no funds. And when she's talking to Harris, she says, we can straighten this all out. She goes, here, let me write you a check. But she was another great character actress. I love the character actors, no matter who or where they are. Love them all.
Getting back to the camp issue, one of the things that Feud does is make explicit the homosexual community admiration for Bette Davis and Joan Crawford, because, and again, I don't know how accurate this was in regards to what actually happened, but when Bette Davis first meets Victor Buono in Feud, she seems appalled that this is going to be my co-star, although probably it's not accurate because it's the novel. It's what he expects. That could be Cary Grant.
Exactly.
But then
he's perfectly cast.
Yeah, but then when he says, "Oh, Miss Davis, I love you, and my community worships you," you could see her softening. And then later in the series, she comes to his rescue after he's been arrested. I love that scene where she says, he's an actor. He's just here. It didn't engage in anything inappropriate. He's just doing research for a film. And then the cop doesn't believe her, so she takes her hat and sunglasses off. Says, do you believe me now? And then you see him with her afterwards saying, oh, thank you. I couldn't call my mother. You're the only one I could reach out to. As I say, I don't know.
That was a great scene, yeah.
I don't know if that's true, but I definitely enjoyed that moment in the series.
Yes, it has an artistic truth to it, and it makes you empathize with both of them. And also, whether it was true for Buono, it was certainly true for so many actors and actresses in that time. Again, this kind of having to be hidden, and you could see the camp element saying, what is it we admire? It's the outrageousness and the sense that these particular actresses go to the max. And there's just something energizing about that.
All right, guys, let's go ahead and take another break and play a preview for next week's show right after these brief messages. Bring home the Smurfs movie on digital now. In this fun, epic adventure, the Smurfs team up with new friends on a daring rescue mission to save Papa Smurf from a league of evil wizards. Buy the film critics are calling pure comedy magic and get over 35 minutes of Smurftastic extras, including new music from Rihanna and more. Available at participating retailers, rated PG from Paramount Pictures.
What about the doll in her apartment?
Could be a fetish.
Fetish?
Fetish can be anything. Any non-sexual object that incites erotic feelings. In this case, a doll.
The Strangler, based on the terrifying crime wave that has gripped Boston and spread across the country.
That makes number 8 for The Strangler. Yeah, it looks that way.
Starring Victor Buono. The shock sensation of whatever happened to Baby Jane as the most baffling, the most horrifying criminal in a decade.
Girl wasn't raped. There was no evidence of maltreatment after death.
No woman is safe as long as the Strangler lives and roams at will.
There are a lot of people who don't laugh at me anymore. They don't laugh at anybody.
Look, please go away.
I'll go. A strange, shocking being of unpredictable emotions. No one knows when or where he will strike again, or who will be his next victim.
That's right, we'll be back next week with a look at The Strangler as Buono Palooza continues. Until then, I want to thank my co-hosts for this month, Otto and Tim. So, Otto, what's keeping you busy, sir?
Mike, how long have we been talking about this? I'm finally working, in fact, finishing the index for the baseball book that hopefully will be out by August or September of this year. That's what I'm doing, and still happy to talk to anybody who wants to talk about Barney Miller at any time.
And Tim, how about yourself? What's new in your world?
Well, I'm a professor enjoying my summer holiday, and I, too, am willing to talk Barney Miller any time of day or night. So if anyone has that craving, just give me a holler. My heart was broken when the Life and Times of Captain Barney Miller podcast came to an end.
That's why Bear Manor published Barney Miller in the files of the old one, too. So for whenever you're missing talking about Barney Miller, you just crack open that book, baby.
Although the sad reality is that was perhaps the only show that Victor Buono did not appear on.
That's true.
That's true.
That's true. Wow.
That's true. He would have been great. Oh, my God. There were any number of roles he could have played.
Thank you guys for being on the show. Thanks to everybody for listening. If you want to hear more of me shooting off my mouth, check out some of the other shows that I work on. They are all available at weirdingwaymedia.com. Thanks especially to our Patreon community. If you want to join the community, visit patreon.com/projection booth. Every donation we get helps the projection booth and Victor Buono take over the world.
Wish I were. Whatever happened to baby Jane? To her smile, her golden hair. Why must everything be so unfair? Is there no one left to care? What really happened to baby Jane?
Here's what happened to baby Jane. She didn't grow up. She just grew old. She was waiting for that big day that her daddy said would come. That's what happened to baby Jane. Here's what happened to baby Jane. She thought the world was at her feet. That is what her daddy said was true. But her daddy didn't always know. Your daddy doesn't always know. So for the past 40 years, her life has been nothing but tears. Her daddy said something great was to be, and she hoped and hoped and hoped and she hoped.
And that's what happened to baby Jane. To her smile, golden hair,
her golden hair.
Why must everything be so unfair? Now there's no one left to care. And that's what happened to baby Jane. And that's what happened to Jane.
What really happened to Jane?
And that's what happened to Jane.
What really happened to Jane?